We are just thrilled today to have Dr. Angie Paccione speak with us. Dr. Paccione is now the former executive director of the Colorado Department of Higher Education. She earned her undergraduate degree with honors from Stanford and her doctorate in education and human resource studies from the Colorado State University. Angie was among the first women to earn a full ride athletic scholarship to college, and she went to Stanford. Then she went on to play professional basketball. And then, when the pioneering Women's League folded, she decided to pursue a career in education. So, Angie was a high school teacher, a coach, and an administrator. And then she became a university professor. And sometime in all of that, she was serving 2 terms in the Colorado House of Representatives, representing Fort Collins. And she co-authored 2 books, Do Big Things and One Team. And through all the work that she has done, Angie continues to be committed to activating the potential of others. She does motivational speaking around the world. She's in great demand. And we are just thrilled and honored to have Dr. Angie Paccione with us today.
Thank
Welcome.
you, Sue. Thank you, Sue, for that very generous introduction. I feel tired already with all of those things I've done. But it certainly has given me a wonderful life, and happy to be here with all of you. I did spend just about 10 years at CSU as both from an instructor side to an assistant professor to a senior researcher. So I've had a lot of different roles in higher ed as well. So the topic today is challenges to the Department of Higher Education. Of course, I've only been gone for a month, almost precisely a month. This Sunday will be a month. My last day was January 9th and served for 7 years. That's the longest serving executive director of the department and the second longest serving executive director of the Commission on Higher Education. The longest serving commissioner of higher education was the very first one in 1965. So that was a long time ago. So I'm been the longest serving since then. Anyway, so I think I have a pretty good vantage point from which to speak about what challenges are facing the department now. Of course, when we think about challenges overall facing higher education, of course, we have to look at it in the context of this current administration, the federal administration, not the state administration. And so, under the Trump administration, of course, there's a whole lot of, if you will, chaos and a lot of also targeting of higher education. Many of those kinds of targets impact our institutions of higher ed here in Colorado, especially with grant funding being reduced or eliminated, things like that. But what I want to focus on is the department. So as of now, the department hasn't really felt any budgetary issues with the federal government. In fact, we did receive a Gear Up grant. This is our fifth Gear Up grant, fifth administration of the Gear Up grant. The Gear Up grant is a 7-year grant, and we've had already 4 of them. And so this is our fifth, and which is fantastic. And so that provides the department with $35 million spread over 7 years to do mostly pre-collegiate work. So we have advisors in the high schools that have a low college going rate. And so we are trying to make sure that those students have the support services that they need to be able to attend the colleges that they want, so that they can ultimately get the jobs that they want. So we are very excited that that was just renewed this year. But other than that, we don't really have a lot of federal dollars at the department. Our institutions do, and those are definitely have been in jeopardy, and have some of those have been cut around things like renewable energy, and so the institutions are suffering more, if you will, than the department is regarding the federal chaos. But I want to focus on the state. And so when we think about the state, of course, we do have budget issues for the state of Colorado. This is a very tight budget year, and even when I was in the legislature, I, I'm I'm glad that I was never on the Joint Budget Committee, because boy, oh boy, they have such tough decisions to make when we have scarcity, if you will, in terms of budget. And we do this year. And so they have very, very tough decisions to make. So I want to just give that caveat that they and anything that we might face in terms of the state budget, they have to make the tough decisions. One of those tough decisions, if you will, we don't think it's tough, but is on the program called Open Educational Resources, OER. We've had this OER grant from the state legislature for about 7 years. And within those years, we have saved students nearly $60 million in textbook fees. OER, instead of buying textbooks, you can purchase class materials and textbooks online. Not purchase, you get those free. These are free resources that students have, and that the courses are designed to have those free resources be the class materials that are used. And so, unfortunately, we have heard stories of students who change their major or decide on a different major because of the cost of the textbooks. So when we think about especially things in the health fields, so when you're looking at a huge anatomy book that costs $400, there are students who can't afford to pay $400 for one textbook. And so in this way, the OER program that works with instructors and professors to help change their course materials to be free and online. We have almost every single college has some OER involvement. And again, we've saved students over $60 million in those 7 years. So the return on the investment, it's only a $1 million investment from the state. So we only ask for $1 million, and that pays for one FTE, and then all the rest is given in grants to the institutions that want to participate. We have a council, and if they want to participate in changing their course materials to be free and online. So that's the one for us that we are keeping our fingers crossed. It just did get through, I think, the House committee, and I believe it's on its way. So hopefully that will get passed. $1 million for the kind of return on investment, I think, is worth that investment. So in terms of budget, that's one. And then the department has really only two significant legislative items for this year, but they're huge. So that's why there's only two, plus the OER. One is the new funding allocation formula. Every 5 years, the department and the Commission on Higher Education, we support the commission, of course, the commission revises the funding allocation formula. And this year it's undergoing a pretty significant renovation, if you will, and revision. And so that one is going to be coming through the legislature. I'm not sure where it is in the process. Maybe Senator March would know more because I haven't been involved in the last month. But we do have a proposal that will go through the legislature. Of course, the legislature gets to make the changes that they want as well, and then it'll go to the governor. But this is how we allocate the state funds for higher education. Just about $1 billion that goes into higher education, and some of that is performance based. And so we're looking at what are the metrics that we want to use in this next iteration of the funding formula, and so that's all under consideration as we speak. The second major bill that the department is moving forward with is kind of you've heard of it. The governor did an executive order back in May, and to restructure the Department of Higher Education to include more workforce development aspects. And so taking pieces of some other departments, like the Department of Labor and Employment, the Department of Economic Development, International Trade, some from the Department of Education. And so taking the workforce-related elements of some of the other departments and incorporating that into essentially a new department that right now, tentatively, we're looking at the name of the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. But that's just a temporary placeholder. I don't know what name is going to come out of that, but that would be, the structure would be more of the Department of Higher Ed and these other workforce kinds of related components. And so that's a restructure that's going to be a big bill. Shouldn't be controversial because that is the direction, if you will, that many states are moving, and that, of course, under the leadership of the governor, Governor Polis, that's the direction that he's setting it forward. Of course, much of that restructuring won't happen until the new governor is on board, whoever that may be. And so what this bill is meant to do, and this proposal, if you will, is meant to do, is to put it in place so that there's some momentum starting for the next governor, and hopefully that will just carry through. There are a couple of other states who have done that in the past, let's say 3 to 5 years, and so it is a trend. And speaking of trends, the trends in higher education, I'm sure, I mean, there's 100 people on the call, so I'm sure you all have seen these trends over the years, but it really started, early in the day. It started with accessibility. Who gets to go to college? And that was the major trend. And there was so much legislation around who gets to go to college. And then, of course, it was affordability. How do you pay for college? And fortunately, in 1972, Title IX was passed. And in 1978, the colleges had to implement Title IX, and that gave people like me an opportunity to go to college on an athletic scholarship. And so that made college affordable, if you will, for me. There's no way I could have gone to Stanford um, without that scholarship. And so that was a trend around affordability. So accessibility, affordability, and then the trend became, just in the last, let's say, 15 years or so, the trend was really around attainment, who actually completes college. And so it's one thing to have the doors open. It's another thing to be able to pay for it through, financial aid and things like that. But it's a whole nother thing around who actually completes, because without completing, you don't have a credential that will get you where you want to go in terms of your career. And so that was attainment was a big one. And even when I joined the department, we had one of our goals was to have 65% in terms of the state attainment rate by 2025. That was our goal. So we were moving in that direction. And just in the last couple of years, we've seen a shift in the trend. And the trend now is around what is the value of that credential in the marketplace. So yes, you get a credential, but can you get a job? And I will say, and then I know. Let me just try to see. Do I have? Okay, so I have until 9:45. Is that right? So I just want to make sure. So one of the things that for me, because since I'm no longer the executive director of the department, I can kind of say this without too much repercussions. For me, the question around value also is who determines the value. And so, for the most part, the country and those in like third party think tanks, they depend on a survey of freshmen um, and asking freshmen why did you decide to go to college, and freshmen of course say they want to get a better job than their parents have, or a better job than their prospects if they didn't go to college, which is all true, but we should be depending on more than just freshmen. um, and I think we need to decide who really determines what the value is it just the value in the marketplace? Because I know, having grown up in the South Bronx in New York, in a working class family, lower working class family. I always joke that we couldn't even rob Peter to pay Paul because Peter didn't have any money. And so too much month at the end of the money. And so there was great value for me in terms of social capital, in terms of being exposed to a different culture. There's so many other intangible kinds of value that higher ed has, especially the 4-year residential kinds of colleges. And each college, each path, post-secondary path, has different value. And so people may go to a trade school to learn a trade, to get a job, but go to a 4-year residential college for all the other kinds of things that it has. And so I think it's important that we pay attention to not just the value in the marketplace, but the value based on the desires and the intentions of the individuals, of why they want to go to college. A lot of first generation kids like myself, I was first gen student, to fulfill a family dream, and also to do better than your family has. And so anyway, so there's a lot of reasons why people go to college, and why we as a state, if you will, and as a community of higher education and post-secondary education, we need to make sure that every student has a clear path with a clear purpose, and that we can deliver on those outcomes. And so that's I take a more holistic approach than just let's prepare people for jobs. So I kind of wanted to stop there and see if there were questions. um, Sue or who?
Good morning. This
Oh,
is Deborah
Deborah. Hi.
Barchetta. Thank you so much, Dr. Paccione. As a teacher in higher education myself, I always enjoy hearing a firsthand perspective like yours. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Deborah Barchetta. I'm an engineer, and for more than 25 years, I've been teaching and serving on boards in higher education. We do have time for questions, and I already have some in the Q&A for you. Angie, are you
Right.
ready?
Sure.
Okay. Uh, so the first question here is from Jane Miller. The Colorado Department of Education has responsibility for adult education, uh, GED prep for adults and without a high school diploma and ESL for immigrant adults. Do you know what will happen to that um,
Unit
unit?
probably. Mhm.
Yeah, when the new education workforce department is built.
Yes. So right now on the table, that will be also moved into this new restructured department that will include adult education as well. So we'll move that over.
Can you summarize what the benefits to students will be for integrating those things in the education and workforce concept?
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal is to kind of break down what could be perceived as departmental silos. Many of these departments and parts of departments were doing very similar kinds of things, or things that were related more specifically to their department, but within the scope of workforce development and education and training. And so this way, to bring it under one roof, I think allows for better communication, more effectiveness. So I think it's good. So I'm on record as saying I like the idea of it as long as we maintain that the fact that there are different reasons why people choose different pathways, and each pathway should be articulated, designed, supported, and without any kind of judgment, if you will. And I think everything is moving in that direction. But this way, instead of having 15 meetings a week that are all around the same thing, that we will bring all of that in house, so to speak, so that we can maximize the use of the time of executive directors and staff members, and that we can have better communication and efficiency. So I really think that that's good, because if you looked at my calendar, yeah, it was always meetings with all of those other departments, and now bringing it all under one, I think, is a good idea.
I think so too. And you said Colorado is moving in that direction.
Well, we have an executive order from the governor to do
Oh,
that. And so
very
that was
good.
last May. And now they had a task force, if you will, that worked on that this year. And so now they're ready to propose some legislation that will create a second level, if you will, task force to say, okay, now we have the direction, we have the recommendations, and now let's figure out how do we get this, ready, not a bill yet, but just getting it ready for the work and stakeholder engagement that will be involved in creating a bill in 2027, if you will, that will actually create the new structure. So before that, we have to do a lot of stakeholder engagement, but we are on target to make that happen.
Okay. Here's another question from Sue Ryden. How can we keep the humanities as part of the new workforce development movement?
Yes, of course, that as you may know and you can guess, Sue, that's a passion of mine as well. I think it's really important that we continue to have people who major in whatever they want to major in. I don't want to be prescriptive about what somebody majors in, but we do want to make sure that any major leads to a good paying job and a career that they want. They may not need a good paying job. Maybe they want to go into, I don't know, art history and be a curator at a museum, and that's okay. They may not you know, make as much as an engineer. Everyone knows that engineers make a whole lot of money, right? And doctors and lawyers, and we all know that. But I don't want a society filled with engineers, doctors, and lawyers. I want people who, have the humanities as a focus and a passion. And so I believe, and I'm sure this will happen, that all majors will be protected, so to speak. Um, we do, and we have, the department did about a year and a half ago or so, look at every single major at every single public college in Colorado to determine if they met what we called the minimum value threshold, which meant when you graduate, 15 years after you graduate, are you making more than it costs you to get that credential? And so most of our colleges, most of our the community college programs and four-year colleges either met or exceeded that minimum value threshold. It's not related to the restructure, but it still is a focus on, can we make sure that all of our majors at least provide that kind of a threshold, even in the humanities. But so it's not meant to exclude any majors.
Very good. I have another question here from Jill Smith. In relation to the trends you mentioned, which I believe were access, affordability, and attainment, how have women progressed through those trends, and when did they start advancing, and what's the current situation there?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And the final trend, which we're in right now, is around value of those credentials. So attainment was good, but the value is even better. Yeah, I believe that all started kind of with the women's rights movement. And so when we think about in the 1970s, if you will, the accessibility about who can go to what colleges. Remember, there was a time where many of the colleges were same-sex colleges, and so having to integrate, so to speak, women into other kinds of colleges. I know even West Point, the military academy, didn't take women until until the mid 70s, I believe it was, because I was part of the group that set the standards for the physical entrance requirements. I was a junior in high school, and I was, a star athlete, and so they had all women athletes in high school, women athletes, young girl athletes, and we kind of set the entrance standards. So that was kind of the mid to late 70s. So I think that's when things started with accessibility, and then, how do you afford it? That came about. So I would say it was right around then. I think that was the question. Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
I think women are doing better, of course, consistently doing better and better. And actually, I think if we look at the overall enrollment, there are more women going to college than sometimes than men in certain fields.
Do you happen to know if the attainment number is similar for women?
I believe it's actually, yeah, I think it's just about equal in terms of attainment. Where attainment really has been an issue is around students of color. And so we have high attainment in certain areas, but not in terms of, especially in Colorado, we had for a long time one of the largest equity gaps, if you will, in terms of attainment with Hispanic students in Colorado colleges, and then with Black or African American students as well. So that was a focus of mine and of the department over the 7 years, is how do we close that attainment gap?
Yeah. We have a question from Cindy Anderson. There are many conversations in the public about the value of education and the return on investment of education. You just mentioned some of that. Her question is, are there ways that we can impact the legislature and others about the social fabric value of higher education?
I love that social fabric value.
I
And
like that too.
yes, and we also call that the social capital, if you will. And that is, it's a huge value of mine, because it was a lived experience of mine to gain that kind of social capital, social fabric, which almost was equally, at least, as important as the actual diploma I got from Stanford. And of course, you have Senator Marchman on, and so she can address more about impacting the legislature and others. But I also will say what Sue's shared earlier about ways to get involved, those are fantastic. And there are multiple ways that you can get involved. And I know probably, the folks who are on this call are already engaged, but maybe bring some of your colleagues into that engagement as well, because the voice of the people is so critical to the work of the legislature. I know when I was a legislator, and Sue was as well, and Betty Boyd is on here as well, that I'm telling you, I didn't realize before I became a legislator how important your voice is, but it is critical to the role that we have. And so attending those town halls and really making those calls and emails is really important. So I would say continue to have that kind of impact. I know it's at 9:45, but I did see a question from Sean Hilton around bills and investments at civic education.
Yes.
This is, yeah, I had just started to make that shift in terms of priorities for the department around that. There are curriculum that are associated with that. Kentucky does a great job of that. And so actually even Senator Marchman, you might even want to look at the Kentucky kind of program around civic education it's really good. And it's built into the general ed courses. So we have about 10 general ed courses. And in Kentucky, they make sure that each of those 10 have some civic education piece so that when you're done with your gen ed courses, you also are more, I will say, civically minded and you have that some real content in terms of civic education. And I can share that stuff with you, Janice.
That's great. I have two questions around the OER
Yeah.
Initiative that you mentioned. The first one is, how can students find out about that?
So so there's a couple of ways. One is there's some institutions that are trying to put like, if you will, like an asterisk or something next to the course description that indicates that this course uses open education resources. And so that was my suggestion that all of them do that because then the students, when they are looking at either it's a section or an entire course that's doing that, then they can know how to plan their budget. They say, oh, great, I won't have to buy textbooks for that course. Otherwise, when you go to sign up for courses, you can ask, students can ask about that. But I do believe that we need to make that a little bit more transparent so that students do know instead of just finding out, let's say, on the first day on the syllabus. And so, so I like the idea of on the course outlines or on the course materials that students can see to determine what class they want to take, that there's some indication that this course uses OER.
Okay, the second question was from Linda Davies, and she wants to know if there are limitations on the OER program and what fields of study it's being used for.
Yeah, so I don't know about any limitations on that, but it's for both textbooks and course materials, and so and it's fantastic, and it's being used in virtually every discipline area, including nursing, and the first OER, what we call a Z degree, which means zero cost for textbooks, and the first Z degree that we had was a degree in a bachelor's degree in Spanish at CSU Pueblo. And now I think we are up to, I want to say 17 Z degrees, or we're on target for about 17 Z degrees, which means for the entire degree, that's going all the way to the bachelor's, that's 4 years of coursework, there's no textbook course cost. And so we are trying to, and the governor is really big on this. He was when he was a congressman on Z degrees. And so we are really focusing on how do we make sure that not just course by course, but actually a degree program could be zero textbook cost.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I have a question in the Q&A from Kathy Finder. How have threats to DEI initiatives combined with the resources into with pouring resources into AI advocacy at
I got it. Yeah.
yeah
And I'll jump in there
public
real quick.
colleges, yeah, in
Yes.
case
I
someone
can,
can't see the chat.
yes.
How does it restrict the accessibility, attainment, and value of higher education for women and those in
Yep.
LGBTQ communities?
Got it. Yes. And it is, the threats are real. And we have our HSIs, our Hispanic Serving Institutions, have lost their funding from the federal government, and any kind of minority serving institutions and any programs that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion are under scrutiny or have lost funding. As some institutions have pulled some of the titles and some of those kinds of programs in anticipation of some federal repercussions. We suggested not to do anything in anticipation. Wait till they tell you to. And so unfortunately, there's been fewer access. There have been some people who have lost their positions at colleges because of that, or had to maybe change their titles, or it breaks my heart because the federal government is using the Civil Rights Act to actually provide cover for eliminating some of these things that were actually designed in and during the civil rights movement to try to make sure that folks who were on the margin, so to speak, had access and affordability and attainment. And now all of those things are under vulnerability, they're under threat. So we're still waiting to see the complete fallout of this. So I don't have numbers to report, but I do know that institutions have lost funding. And there is a House Bill 26-1006, which is trying to kind of backfill some of those, some of the funding that was cut for student services for students who fall into these kinds of categories of the DEI initiatives. So I don't know, again, we don't have a lot of money in the state, so I'm not sure what the fiscal note is for that bill, but it's House Bill 26-1006. So I would say, please look that up and maybe go and testify and maybe expand what they're looking to support. But I do know, I can't remember who's sponsoring that bill. So maybe somebody could look it up while we're talking, but I know it's 1006. So maybe there's a way to expand it to include these other protected categories.
I think we'll all be sure to look at that very carefully. Thanks for pointing out the bill number there. I have another question for you about the federal changes to student loan caps. We didn't really touch on that whole topic, but obviously there are going to be changes to the student loan caps and the classifications for student loans. Will that have a strong effect on Colorado enrollments?
It's a great question. It's a sad commentary on what's happening in the federal government, because there are especially students of low-income students who unfortunately have to take it because of the cost of higher education. That's a whole nother, we could do a whole day on that one, but they do have to take out loans if they want to get into the professions that have high tuition rates. So especially when we talk about graduate loans as well. So if you want to become a doctor and you can't afford the high tuition and even the application fee for medical school, now you're stuck. So, okay, so people who are low income are not going to be able to become doctors or, things like that, lawyers. And so it really is a restructuring of our society, if you will, to see who can afford to do what. And so putting those caps on what is able, I don't like the idea that it costs so much in the first place, but given that it does, we should still have equal access for all students to be able to afford those kinds of curriculum, those kinds of schools. And so in Colorado for undergraduate, we actually have a very low student loan balance. In fact, it's less than $25,000. Students who graduate from our four-year institutions have less than $25,000 student loans. And half of them graduate with no debt. So we don't always, I don't know why we don't shout that from the mountaintops, but that, so there is a perception that everyone is graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans, but that's really not the case. It actually is more affordable than people think. But when we go to the graduate loans where the caps are going to be as well, then that limits what you have, what opportunities you have.
I think you're right. We should be proud of that. I have another question about something we might be proud of. When we were preparing for this conference, we realized that many of the university presidents here in Colorado are actually women. And of course, AAUW champions women in administrative leadership. Is this a nationwide trend, or is this truly something Colorado should be proud of?
Well, Colorado should definitely be proud of that. And I want to give a tip of the hat to former Chancellor Joe Garcia, because Joe Garcia really was determined, if you will, not in any kind of putting his finger on the scale, but making sure that the applications for these president positions were inclusive. And then, folks, of course, by merit, were named to those roles. And so I think he single-handedly changed the landscape, if you will, for the presidents, especially of our community colleges. But we also have, people like Amy Parsons at CSU Fort Collins. So even our four-year institutions also have I'm trying to think of who else in our four-year institutions. It's not coming to mind right away. Rhonda Trotter down at CSU Pueblo,
Yep.
also female. So we do have. Oh yeah, Heather Schotten, that's Fort Lewis. Thank you. Yeah, so yes, it's lovely to see that, and then even it was just announced, I think yesterday, that Rico Munn will be the chancellor of the CSU system. So also, a person of color. So I think that Colorado was maybe leading the way in terms of the diversity in those executive positions, and I'm happy to see that happen. So
That's wonderful. We have 5 minutes left. I
okay.
wonder if you could tell us what the three most challenging issues were that you faced as a director for higher education in our state.
Wow. Oh, wow. Putting you on the spot there. I think always in Colorado, well, the three most challenging, one was COVID, of course, and how can the institutions make that very nimble, agile change to being primarily online? So that was a big one. Yeah, so COVID was a big challenge for all of higher education, how to make that shift and make sure that students still had the education that they thought they were going to get. That was a big shift. Budget is also always a big constraint on higher education. And let me think if there was another one. I think that I think that we have been very successful in new initiatives that we have started. We did designations for colleges that were hunger-free colleges, so they had the resources to provide for students to make sure that they didn't have food insecurities. We did mental health, and so Healthy Minds Campus, and so colleges signed up and earned those designations. And then we expanded access, so we have students who are in the foster care system can get free education. Students who are experiencing homelessness gets free college education. And the one I'm most proud of is that students who had started a four-year institution but weren't able to complete because life happens, that now those four-year institutions can award an associate's degree. Because prior to that, that's called our core program. Prior to that, you could go 3 years, 3.5 years at our flagship, CU Boulder. And if you didn't complete, your highest credential was your high school diploma. And even though you got the education, you didn't get the credential. And so it now, at least with an associate's, it can maximize your earning potential. So that's those things I'm really, really proud of, even amidst all of the constraints and challenges that we had. Higher
That's
education is
wonderful.
in a good place in Colorado.